Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Footy Pot. God damn it.
Just keep going. I love it.
Okay. Take two. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Footy Dashi podcast. I'm Nicholas. I'm here with Lauren, and we promised you special guests. In fact, we didn't just bring on a special guest, we brought on an extra special guest. So, Russ, you're going to have to really live up to the hype here. We are here
so
with
sorry. I'm going to totally disappoint all of you. I'm sorry.
We like to overhype and then undersell on the podcast. That's really sort of the way we do
opposite of our work-life balance. All right.
So, Russ, oh my God, so Russ sent us a bio, and he is more impressive than Lauren and I put together. And we're already pretty impressive individuals. So let's go through this. So we have for you today an individual who has worked for what seems like every single AAA studio in existence. We have EA, we've got Maxis, Visual Concepts. Well, I mean, some of these are not AAA studios, but Visual Concepts, Screen Life, 3G Studios, Gearbox, 2K, and now 31st Union, where he's currently working on a project, much like Lauren, can't talk about. So don't ask. Stop asking. We can't talk about it. We literally can't talk about it, or we will lose everything that we own. Some games. We've got The Sims 2, Sims Bustin' Out, NBA 2K, Family Guy DVD Blast, Superman DVD Blast, Survivor DVD Blast, Borderlands 2, mobile games, and of course the aforementioned unannounced game that we can't talk about. But Russ does everything. Kind of. So here's the thing. When we talk about video game production, we're often like, I'm a game designer, or no, I do art, I do programming. But Russ does video production, motion graphics, user interface and user experience design, photography, marketing, title design, creative writing, voice acting, and 3D animation. But you don't want to hear about any of that. You want to hear about the very first game that Russ ever played, which is the classic Pac-Man. And so when we like to sort of begin with people's journeys in video games, like how they got started. And we like to go all the way back to childhood, sometimes to dredge up traumatic memories. But this is not a traumatic memory. So Russ, can you tell us a little bit about your very, very first experience?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that awesome welcoming intro. My goodness, I just feel my ego needed that so badly. You have no idea. As the origin story goes. So let's go back. Let's do the Wayne's World. Back to the 80s. And what my father would do was every Saturday he would take my brother and I. At the time, I think my brother was 4 and I was 6 or something like that. And he would always take us out to this frozen yogurt shop based in Rohnert Park. I grew up in the Bay Area. And they had, and which to Nicholas's credit, by the way, thank you, Nicholas. I was calling these arcades tabletop arcades, which has been the wrong thing to say for ever. Apparently they are cocktail cabinets or cocktail arcades.
There's called cocktails usually.
Just
you can call it a cocktail cabinet in the same way that you call them upright cabinets. But
gotcha.
So I am always the actually guy when it comes to the historical stuff on the podcast. So don't feel
that's awesome
about that. But yeah, so the reason why they were called cocktails is because when they were first developed, the idea was that it was supposed to be for because you would often see them in bowling alleys. So I'm talking about the US here. You would see them in bowling alleys. You would see them in bars. And the idea is that the video game was sort of this social mechanism. It's this thing that everybody would gather around, get really drunk, eat terrible bar food, play Frogger. Like that was supposed to be part of like the whole social experience. And it was over time that, video games then evolved into sort of like the platforms and systems that we have now. So that's why it's called a cocktail, because you can set your drink on it.
I mean, that sounds exactly like what Coin Op used to be up here in the city that unfortunately shut down because of the COVID pandemic. And Coin Op was just full of cocktail cabinets, I would say, and then had amazingly like titled drinks like the Gordon Freeman. That was my favorite, and also an excellent game. Right, we also had like Princess Peach and like just like a bunch of stuff. But yeah, like that's exactly that's my childhood memories right there, or adult childhood memories, whatever.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
but I
so
think
going.
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was going back to your story, Russ.
Sorry. With that, we always have to get some interruption in. Sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
No, you're good. What did you want to finish your thought, Lauren?
Oh, no thought. Just
no
go
thought,
back
no
to your
thought.
story. No
Yeah.
thought.
Well,
Let's
well,
go.
and I think what you're talking about is it totally makes sense in terms of even what we were doing as kids was like it was designed to actually encourage that social element, right? And actually like going further and more into like the 90s, that was like the golden age of arcade. Just you go to an arcade, the whole like you place your token or your quarter up there. You don't even know the people who are playing, but you knew it's like I get the next game. You put that up there, and it was all those little things really fun. But what was interesting about the frozen yogurt shop was my father was not a gamer. To give you an idea, my father was he was a police officer. He was literally the SWAT team captain. He loved to go scuba diving. I mean, all these things that I'm not. and so like we would go to the frozen yogurt shop and like my brother and I, Steve, we would sit down and we wouldn't know how the machine worked. We would just see the game running through its demo, and we'd be eating our little frozen yogurt. And we were acting like we knew what we were doing with the joystick and the buttons and whatnot. Well, one day, a stranger saw us sitting there and said, "Oh, you boys want to play the game?" And it was literally like one of those comedies you see where my dad was in slow motion going, "No!" And he pulls out the shiny quarter and he goes over it and he puts it in before my dad could stop him. And all of a sudden, all of the lights turned on, and the sound came on, like, and you're like, "What is this magic you have uncovered?" And suddenly we could actually control Pac-Man, and oh, it was over after that. My dad knew it. He knew it was over. My brother and I were hooked ever since. So
that is amazing. We like that at the same time.
No, but I especially like the whole, you were seduced by the power of Pac-Man.
It was like my version of Eden, right? Like it was like the apple was shown to me and I took a big chomp and I was like, "Oh, I now have knowledge. This is amazing." And I was a little bitter to my dad too, because I was just like, you totally manipulated us. We thought that this is just how it was, and there was this whole other world to discover. Like, I still give him crap to this day about that.
You should give him crap. That is awesome. I love hearing the I don't know, it's so funny because I've never had somebody say like Pac-Man was my Eden, and then suddenly I'm like, yeah, but like also like you are chomping on the fruit and you are Pac-Man. Like I've never had someone be like, I am Pac-Man. And honestly, like that is what we are at our core. It's just people that like to chomp down on food and like run around this maze of life.
Yeah, Pac-Man is the id. It is
Yes.
quite literally them. I don't know if it's the id, but it certainly seems like the id.
Well, that's kind of like I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today, Russell, because for me, you do something that I don't think a lot of people know about in the video games industry, and you've done so much in your career, right? That for me, I want to kind of open up that window, so to speak, right? Into how AAA development isn't just a bunch of like game designers sitting around a table and like giving each other shit. I mean, it is, but right there, it's part of it, right? But like, how did you get from being have the apple of Eden, you have all this knowledge of game development, right, to actually getting into the games industry?
So that has been an interesting journey for me overall, because originally my dream was to work more in film, specifically either ILM or in Pixar, because I love special effects. I loved what they were doing with all the character animation and whatnot. But at the time, it was a daunting task because I remember when I as I was getting ready to graduate college, this is back in 2002. So that dates me.
Hey, hey, I am a fellow old man on this podcast.
Yes,
old men now dominate.
But no, like I remember having almost well, not a panic attack, but like I was getting the sensation of feeling depressed because the tools were not as user-friendly back then as they are today. To give you an idea, sub Ds were the cat's meow back then. That was like when Jerry's game got released and like people were discovering like, hey, we don't have to use NURBS anymore. We can use subdivisional surfaces. And it was interesting because I was actually at my very first GDC was in 2002.
Hold up there, Russ. Can you go into like what you just said as
there's a lot
and maybe in English, maybe in
in terms of the terminology
of the tech, give me something, because I realized for you this is a moment where you were like having a breakthrough, and I want to have that breakthrough with you. So could you just talk about what you just said as what was actually the breakthrough when people are transitioning to that type of technology? Like, give me an example so that I can follow with you, and then we'll go back to your first time.
Sure. So okay, actually, you know what? I'll rewind it a bit further. So, back in 1995, I'm dating myself even more.
Nice.
I got my first internship at Autodesk, and I met this guy. His name is Roy Dorado. He ever since then has been my mentor. He is a fantastically sharp individual, and really briefly, like one of the things I'm so grateful for him was that he was an enabler. And for me growing up, like when I heard the word enabler, it had kind of a negative connotation associated with it, right? Like, this person likes to drink. They're an enabler. They're enabling me, and I have a problem with alcoholism or something to that effect, right? He was the exact opposite of that, where he actually saw this pimply-faced, nerdy kid. I had nothing to offer him, and he took me under his wing, and suddenly I was like this 15-year-old kid who had an internship at Autodesk. And that was crazy because this is before, well, actually Windows 95 just got released, but like 3D Studio was just called 3D Studio back then. So you had to literally go through like the MS-DOS command prompt and be like .exe launch, and do that kind of thing.
Call directory, make directory. Yep.
Yes,
good
my
days.
Man. so yeah, like going from that into college, it was like this weird, rapidly changing industry in terms of how the tools were used, because you went from these very basic primitive shapes like spheres and cylinders and that sort of thing, and then suddenly you had more and more of these tools that were being designed, such as NURBS, which to folks who don't know what that means, that's non-uniform rational B-splines, and that was a big step forward. But at the same time, it was very complex to just creatives like myself. Like you had certain people who were very knowledgeable and skilled when it came to manipulating that, but unfortunately that group was pretty small. Like you didn't have as much of the user friendliness. Then you came to sub Ds, which again, like if you think of like a three-dimensional cube, you can select a face on one of those sides of the cube, and you can literally like extrude from that another cube. And if you do that over and over and over again, you can do that, using ideally quads. But that was a massive step forward in terms of how we could actually detail props in video games, faces on characters, environments. And since that time, the sub Ds has remained kind of the bedrock with a lot of these newer programs. I hope I'm answering the question that you want.
No, I was gonna say this is so like inspiring. Like it's crazy to think about how, I don't know, how much technology has evolved, right? And I feel like I can talk about it from my perspective. And I would say I relatively got into games when a lot of technology was just really kind of updating the same stuff over and over again, right?
Sure.
Versus these fundamental shifts in how we produce games. And so it is always awesome for me to hear about that. So thank you for taking me on that journey, because I was like, whoa, you are saying something very important to you right now. And I don't know what that is.
Not just important in terms of Russ's own history, but like that's sort of a cataclysmic moment in like the history of video games, because you're talking about a historical shift from essentially like 2D approximations of 3D renders into like actual 3D rendering. like that happened historically in a moment, and it's like people lived through it, and we can talk to them about it. And like, well, that's
still
felt like. Okay, I didn't mean to put it that way. It's not like you're just some ancient demon.
Yeah.
that we
Okay, so
conjured.
So tell me about that. It sounds like you were doing the art, you're doing that, and you're getting into the games industry. You've got your first GDC. Let's go to there, and I want to really make sure we do hit on how we got into the multimedia section, right? Because that's kind of
Sure.
later on in your career, so we might skip a little. But
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I feel like this is important to say because when I was at my first GDC in 2002, I was on the cusp of graduating college, and I was feeling depressed because I realized I didn't have my skills basically were not up to par in terms of getting a job at places like ILM or Pixar, which is crazy because I had already known people who worked at these different places, and even they were trying to pull for me. But as we all know, those are some of the most sought after places. It's harder to get into than Fort Knox. I mean, even like for like a the front desk. I don't even know what they call it, secretary or whatever, but like that particular, I remember this is way back in the day. That position was open. They got over something like 1,500 applicants or something to that effect. I mean, it was just insane because everybody was trying to get their foot in the door.
Yeah.
So I have to give props to a college buddy. His name is Steve Swink. And I think last I heard, I think he's teaching game design at a college in Arizona, I want to say. But I remember we were breaking for lunch at GDC, and I was kind of just, feeling kind of down in the dumps about like my certain predicament that I was in. So he asked me about it, and I just explained it, and he said, have you ever thought about motion graphics? And I was like, I have never heard of this term, motion graphics, because my world had been in 3D modeling and animation for my college career. And he said, yeah, he's like, you helped us out with within the video game department of the college that we went to. And what I had done is I had done some promotional video work and that sort of thing for their project that they were presenting at GDC. He's like, yeah, like what you did there, that's called motion graphics. He's like, I think you should really pursue that because you've got certain skills in that. And so that planted a seed in me because I was not aware of having this other, way of contributing with motion graphics. And actually motion graphics, you can plug into many different industries, and it just kind of depends on those kind of capacities. So I just figured out I would get that out of the way really quick because I feel like that is definitely one of the pillars of who I am, I guess you could say, in terms of career.
That is crazy to think about. I mean, not just the timing of that, but with the technology, but also like how your friends just like, actually, I know you've been doing a bunch of this stuff that you think you're doing, but really, right? And like it takes other people sometimes to kind of tell you about yourself.
Well, and I appreciate the honesty too, right? Like that's what true friends do, is like they can take a raw inventory of who you are as a friend or who you are as a person or whatever, and like sometimes it can be brutally honest. Other times, though, it's like you need a recalibration, don't you? And I know I can speak for myself where it's like that was a complete recalibration because my friends saw that like I felt lost. I was just kind of blowing aimlessly like a leaf in the wind. And I knew the industries I wanted to get into, but I didn't know how to actually plug myself in and be able to utilize what it is that I love to do, basically.
Okay, so my immediate thought there is, one, I love the fact that like when software and video games, like anything having to do with software design is talked about, like people tend to overemphasize all of these like hard skills. Like, do you know how to code? Like, do you even know how to code, bro? But the more and more that Lauren and I talk to people, what we come to realize is that it's actually like the human skills that seem to be more important than anything else. It's the ability, like you said, to have someone in your life who can look at all of the things that you can do and not necessarily repackage it for you, but make you see it in a fundamentally different way. It's those so-called like soft skills that actually get people into the positions that they need to be in to do really innovative work, because otherwise the cat is trying to eat my leftover pizza.
Yes.
I'll cut that
out.
I let you up here and you're doing this. Sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
No, I think you should leave that in. I think you should cut us out saying that, or you can cut it out. You can cut this part out, but you should leave that in because otherwise the cat is eating my pizza.
Yes.
But
I do have to add one totally random bit. I don't think Lauren saw this. So my daughter just last Friday brought home a drawing from art class where she drew a cat eating a donut. So it's kind of in that wheelhouse of what you just described. I had to tell you that.
Oh, that's awesome. No, those are like the little interesting life things that like, happen in your life and then they make you remember like kind of why you're doing this, right?
So Russ, what would you consider to be like the moment in your career when you finally realize like, aha, I have arrived? Or maybe you don't feel like you've arrived. Like what sort of stands out as like sort of the spark or the moment where you're like, I now know where I am and what I'm doing, if at all?
That's a really good question. For someone like myself, and especially I become more acutely aware of this the older I get. And what that is that the older I get, the more I realize that there are so many things I don't know. And that's a very good thing.
Yes.
Because it gives me the opportunity to be able to learn more. And that is not limited to just the video game industry. That's limits that just goes into all things, which is great. I mean, that's kind of the spice of life, isn't it? It's like, I don't want to know all there is to know about, say, for instance, motion graphics or about 3D, which I don't. I mean, like there will always be someone who is better than me at any given thing. And that's fantastic because that makes life worth living. It's one of those things where like, I want to be inspired. I want to see that goal and be like, you know what? I know I can't get there yet, but I'm going to strive and create a stretch goal to get there. And I think that is part of when I think of my career, I look at it as almost like, it's almost like Xbox achievement unlocks, right? Or like PlayStation trophies, right? It's like, you worked on Borderlands 2. It comes out and like, all right, I unlocked that achievement. But I haven't completed the game yet, right? I haven't gotten to the end of the game. And not to mention the fact, even if I did think I was at the end of the game, there's New Game Plus. So hey, there's a whole nother opportunity to be able to start over again. So
what would the speedrunning version of your life look like?
Oh my goodness! I don't even want.
Sorry, it's kind of a non sequitur. It's just like following along the achievements.
That is a good question. My brain. You have to be careful because I am so visual. Like when you said that, now I've got this whole like monstrosity playing and mentally in my brain.
I love that because for me, I feel like I've lived my life on speedrun. And when I say that, I mean I was doing a different job or a different career or something different every single year. And it didn't help that when I was a child, I was in a different school system every single year of my life until I was like 8 or 9.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so in the United States, that basically, and I started school when I was 3 years old because of my parents both worked and they were like, the daycare centers were too expensive, but the school was like very inexpensive comparatively. So they just enlisted me. Sorry.
Wow. I was
assassin by the age of 8 years old.
Drafted into preschool.
Black Widow, eat your heart out.
I was like, wow, I don't know. Vanguard came out this week. There we go. But yeah, so I was just always in school, so I'm just used to like chew, right? Like change. And finally, when I got into the games industry, because it takes so long to make games, right? Mm-hmm. It really is something where you're like, you almost have to slow down, which is funny because games is not a slow industry to be in. It is a very fast-paced environment. Yeah. But the timelines are different. And so I was already equipped to handle fastness, but I wasn't really equipped to handle slow. And when I also started the industry, I absolutely related to your story, Russ, where you got to a point where you were kind of listful and depressed because you got something in a degree that you loved, but you're like, man, I'm lacking something because I'm not able to get into the industry that I want to get into.
Right.
And so I would love to know if you had any advice for people that are kind of feeling that same way, especially coming after COVID here. I've met so many new students that graduated in 2019 or 2020, right?
Yeah.
And when they graduate in 2020, they can't network, they can't go to those places. So kind of what advice do you have for people that, are probably feeling like you did then, but feeling like that now, right? And they want to get into games.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, networking is so paramount. And I don't mean the cheap use people kind of thing and then throw them away later. I mean, like generally have or not generally, like genuinely, there we go, hello brain, work, genuinely have an interest in people, and especially if it comes to the industries that you're interested in working in, because more often than not you will have certain fundamental commonalities with those folks anyway. And like, to give you an idea, like my first foray going into video games was working for Maxis, and my girlfriend at the time, who was like my college sweetheart, Lauren, I don't know if you know who she is, but her name is Lindsay Pearson now. She still works on The Sims. She's like, I don't know if she's a GM now or something, but I mean, she is a wonderful success story of someone who came out of college, started as a game tester, worked her way up through assistant producer, associate producer, so on and so forth, was the brainchild behind Making Magic. It was one of the expansion packs for The Sims. And I remember I was working for Cisco Systems back when I first graduated. It was in the corporate sector, and I was just very unhappy. And I was like, man, like my heart is in games. Like I play games on the regular all the time. And she was instrumental in putting a word in for me to get into Maxis in the first place, because they were rapidly expanding, because they had multiple Sims games that they were working on. I mean, they even had SimCity 4000 that was under development back in the day. And so my first foray was actually becoming a game tester, working on The Sims Bustin' Out. And it just so happened that was for the Xbox division. But that was also such a huge trajectory point for me, because she was very instrumental for that. And I'm so grateful for what she did to this day. And it's been a blast watching her ascend the ranks, and has become such a cornerstone of the world that is The Sims. I mean, she eats, sleeps, breathes that game, and so much of who, I mean, she's such a sharp, wonderful person, just even outside of all the work and everything else. I mean, to give you an idea, one of her grandparents found one of the elements on the scientific periodic like chart, the table that we all learn in high school or whatever. Yeah, her grandfather or someone like found one of those elements. So it's like, yeah.
It's in her genetic code to just be
yes,
awesome.
She's way smarter than I could ever hope to be. So anyway, that was, but I think in terms of not to make this long-winded, but just that was a prime example of advice I would have, is like, you know, when you have someone, whether it's a significant other or it's a friend, or maybe you're just doing networking is such a huge thing, especially when you stay in touch with these folks and you're able to celebrate in their successes or advancements or promotions. You're able to cry with them, or have a shoulder to like be able to counsel them during their failures and their flaws or mistakes that they made, right? And the other side of the equation is, it is such an exciting time right now in terms of the convenience of learning, right? I mean, you can literally learn anything you want to learn on YouTube, on Twitch. You can even like look up certain podcasts if you want to. And we didn't have, you know, this is where I get to invoke the old man. We didn't have that back in my day. You know, like we had to
read books.
I had to go down to the library and flip open a huge book and read it. Yeah, I mean, it's today, it's such an exciting world. And I also think too, that the industries like the video game industry, they've gotten to a point where they're much more accessible in that regard. You know, it's weird because we used to like Nicholas and I would probably have to stop by in person, right, to drop off a resume, which they don't do anymore. That's like kind of one of the more impersonal sides. But
well, actually, here's something that I think is really important, because you're talking about networking in a fundamentally different way. Because I think when most people hear the phrase networking, they think like, you know, large meet and greet functions, and they think of it primarily as a transactional relationship. Like, I'm getting to know you so that you can further my career. But what you're talking about, but I mean, that is an aspect of what you're talking about. But in many ways, that's secondary to like forming really deeply meaningful personal relationships. And they can be like mentor and mentee, they could be friendships, but they're the kinds of relationships where instead of like looking at someone as like, how are you going to further my career? It's more like solidarity. It's like, how are we going to help each other?
Right.
How can I celebrate in your success? You can celebrate in mine. And how can we recognize like that it's valuable when we both succeed? And that's where I think where most people don't actually think of networking in those terms. And so I really, really want to stress that point, even though you said it far more beautifully than I did.
Nonsense.
No, I think you both said it excellently, because at the end of the day, right, this is why we're bringing guests onto the podcast, is to make sure that like we foster like the relationships, but like talk about unique and interesting positions that people can have in the games industry from wildly different careers. Because I did not start in the games industry with like a comp sci degree or even art. Like if they had hired me for my drawing skills, like I would have been really lucky. Like there would have been no skill on that. It would have been 100 luck and a -1 modifier. So it would have gotten on a 99. But so to wrap us up here, we want to do something super fun, and we want to go into rapid fire questioning. And so what's going to happen is, Nicholas, you are going to lead this one because you can get into it.
It's because I'm a fellow old man.
Because transparency, everyone here, I'm having some audio issues, so we're fixing me in post. So if I sound a little gnarly, that's why. But it's going to be fine. It's going to be great. So thank you,
Lauren,
guys.
do you mind if I give you a shout out before we go into the rapid fire?
Oh my God, yeah. What?
So, okay. I have been so thankful that you have joined us at 31st Union because of so much of the input that you have put in and the work that you have done has made our upcoming game that much better. And it was interesting when you first got hired on because I obviously didn't know you at that time, but I was paying attention to the contributions that you were making. And one of the areas that Lauren has been an absolute rock star is in the narrative area, because that was one of the areas that I have always held a special place for, not just with the game that we're working on, but like in general, like when I'm playing games, I love me some quality narrative. So Lauren has really been pushing forward and championing that in terms of what we can try and do for the game that we're working on. And I've been very, very thankful for that, just because I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to get fired, but
I was like,
it's like NDA.
Yeah, NDA. But like in terms of like what she's doing, I gotta say I'm very excited for it, and I look forward to seeing like how all of it comes together. I'll leave it with that.
Wow, thank you.
No, you guys are crying. I'm not crying.
No, I'm not crying. You're crying.
Okay, so it's very, very, very serious question, Russ.
Yes, sir.
So if a song comes on, like say your Spotify weekly or like on the radio, what is a song that you hear that you absolutely have to sing the moment it comes on?
So there are many. These are I just know are going to be great questions because. So I have a horrible singing voice. It is atrocious. I could probably make glass break. However, that doesn't stop me from making a joyful noise in my car. And it kind of leaps, right? There's many songs. The one that I am really hooked on right now is called Faith by Stevie Wonder and Ariana Grande. The original Faith song that Stevie Wonder does is actually a lot slower. However, my daughter watches this, I think it's called Sing. It's a 3D animated film. It has a lot of great music in there, but they did a remix of the song. You could be totally in the dumps. If you listen to that song, that specific version of the song, I think you'll be feeling better.
No, you're crying. All right, next up. Okay. Hot topic. In fact, hot topic so hot that it's on a hot pizza. What is your ideal slice? What's your
Canadian bacon and pineapple?
Okay, moving on.
Your faces. Look at your face.
Wow, moving on.
It's like me, fruity yet oddly appealing.
Okay, I take it back. It's perfect. All right, so okay, what is the game you are playing right now at this very moment?
I just finished Guardians of the Galaxy by Eidos Montreal, and that. Okay, Lauren. By the way, speaking of narrative, like. The dialogue, the VO, the writing, and just the overall narrative is fantastic. Like, you want to talk about getting in the feels. By the time I beat that game, I was like, wow. Like, James Gunn had a hard enough time being creative in that capacity of these misfits, and how is he going to bring them to the silver screen? And he did it, and it was fantastic. So then I was thinking, wow, Eidos is going to try and do this, and they did. In my humble opinion, I was like, I even wrote them on social media. I was like, wow, you guys captured the spirit of Guardians of the Galaxy. Bravo.
Oh, I am so happy to hear that. I actually met Raina Anderson at a GDC once. We got ice cream together at Mel's Diner for all of the writing. And ever since then, when she was like, oh, I worked at Eidos and I was working at Crystal at the time, we were like, oh, we're like sisters, like sister studios, right?
Yeah.
And we've kind of just slightly kept in topic. But yeah, I will shout her out too, because I've been looking forward to playing that game. And now she went from being one of like the lead writers to the senior narrative coordinator
Awesome.
on that project. So I am super happy to hear that. I know with a leader like that, who knows how much she was involved in that project, like, you know, from the writing to the VO.
Sure.
But as a coordinator, she's got to be in everything. So I'm just hands down excited.
All right, next question. Favorite game of all time?
Oh man, you and these questions. This
Lauren wrote the questions. I didn't write them. I'm just reading them.
No. The questions are great. It's like I find myself having to cheat on this because there are so many games that I love. So am I allowed to? Or
no,
you have to pick
you have to pick your favorite child.
Oh, freaking A. Let's see. Oh my gosh, I have them written down here, and it's like, how do I choose one of my children? I can't. They're all just so lovely. Okay, I'm going to just go with, if you're gonna make me choose one, I'm going to choose one that's a little more recent, which is Horizon Zero Dawn.
It's a very good game. Yeah,
I was absolutely blown away by what Guerrilla Games came up with that. There are so many forward-thinking approaches to what they did in terms of the game design, the environments, the characters. I'm very much looking forward to the sequel.
Yeah, Horizon also has probably my favorite current voice actor of all time, which is Ashley Birch. Just absolutely phenomenal actor. Like, she knocks it out of the park every single time. It's amazing.
Oh yeah. And I have to say that, like, I'm pretty sure playing Horizon Zero Dawn got me my job at Crystal Dynamics because I couldn't stop talking about the UI in that game. And it also got me out of level design and into systems design because I was supposed to be a level designer there. But because the systems team likes UI and I wouldn't shut up about how good it was in Horizon Zero Dawn, they're like, okay, we're going to hire you, but strike that actual application. You're going to go here instead.
That's cool. That's very cool.
All right, final question, because we are actually, well, that's not actually the final question, but you already answered the final question earlier. So.
Yeah, I skipped a little ahead because like it was just the right moment for it.
Okay, but this is a good one to end on because we are a podcast about sort of thinking critically about video games.
Sure.
So not necessarily your favorite game, but the game that sort of like stuck in your head and you were constantly thinking about, and why.
So, and you're probably, I had two games, but you were going to make me choose one. And,
No, you do both. Actually, this is important.
I can do both?
We'll go over. Yeah, we'll go over. It's fine.
Okay, so the first game is Firewatch. Have you played Firewatch at all? Okay. What's crazy about Firewatch is that this is a title, when you think, it's kind of more of an indie title. The graphics engine itself is you know, it's like it's standard fare, right? Like it's not like something that is on the bleeding edge when you think of like graphics engines and that sort of thing. But what got me thinking critically about it was, once again, it was the narrative. And I have all kinds of different experiences when it comes to like these single player narrative titles. And what struck me was the approach that they made in Firewatch, where for those who haven't played it, you're kind of on this campground site, and you have this other character, this female who's in some other watchtower. Like the premise being that you have these watchtowers that keep an eye on like the campgrounds. But I found the relationship that they were able to forge with the back and forth. You never see this character, you only hear her, but the VO was so well done, and the writing itself, man, it stuck with me in a way that makes me excited for the future of how we can push narrative in games, because it wasn't just, oh, you need to go here and put out this fire. Oh, you need to walk over here and find this tool, or, you know, those kind of chores, as I lovingly refer to them in games. But it was more about, she got in my head as a gamer.
Yeah.
It was interesting how it first, and especially as the relationship started to form in terms of these two characters, and and I don't want to like spoil anything, but basically like you run the gamut in terms of what humanity tends to do in terms of lifting you up, of letting you down, of betraying you, of redemption, like redeeming said trust. And I think that there's a lot there in terms of the unspoken or the subconscious of kind of what you're left with. And I'm being vague intentionally because I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't played it. But for me, like that to this day has had a lingering impact in many different ways. And I thought it was really interesting how I'm like trudging through this campground, and all of a sudden, like, you know, we're having conversations about past relationships or even our like kind of like professional relationship and what's going on, and being able to confide in each other. And it had absolutely nothing to do with like the mission at hand, but at the same time it was like, wow, this works, this makes sense. And so I don't know if that makes sense to you guys or not.
Yeah, no, I noticed a similar thing in like Soma does this as well, where like the sort of the conversations that you have with characters that that are remote but you're supposed to be helping, they have this like not just a philosophical overlay, but also at the same time it's like, wait a minute, why am I playing this? Why am I doing these tasks in this game in this way?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no,
I'm curious, did you two have that same type of experience when you were playing Firewatch?
Lauren, why don't you go ahead? I have an answer to this, but I want to see what you have to say.
I mean, so for me, when I played Firewatch, I really kind of got invested in more of like the storytelling that happened directly or in the environment. So for me, I was really impressed by the environmental storytelling and how in a seemingly like open world, they actually really shuttled you in a single player kind of driven experience. At the time I played it, I was in level design. And so I was really looking at it right from a level design perspective. I tend to do that. And I did really like the storytelling and the voice acting as well. I think that's what really sold it, was that when you uncover in a lot of these amazing games where you have someone that's on remote, it's really a mystery, right? It's is the person that's talking to me telling the truth, right? Am I telling the truth? Because you aren't playing yourself, right? But you can only assume the truth is being told to you. Like that's the confirmation bias. And so for me, it was looking at how that confirmation bias went against or with, right, the environment, right? When was the environment correct? And then it like, yes, that's the truth. Or when was the environment like a little strange? Like, wait, this doesn't really feel like what was being said is what I'm seeing. But then you as the player or the character aren't necessarily like saying that back. And so I think that was what really stood out to me. So yeah, I mean, kind of my experience was similar to yours, but also like I was really focused on the visuals. I'm a very visual person. So I was like, wait, what I am hearing and what I am seeing, dissonance, but in a good way, not like in a bad way.
Yeah, for me, it was more the like the subjective mood is pretty much the only way that I can describe it. Is because you are as Lauren said, you're sort of shunted into a particular kind of experience, but it had that really great quality that a lot of like survival horror. I mean, it is sort of survival horror ish, but it has that really great quality where it's like, one, you don't really know why you're doing what you're doing, and you're just kind of like it's almost like you have to follow. So I when I played the game, I immediately compared it in my head to like BioShock, where the very beginning of the game, you find yourself like somebody is immediately talking in your head and telling you like, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And I'm not going to spoil we've spoiled BioShock in other episodes of the podcast, but the point is that the fundamental difference was that like in the case of interacting with Atlas kind of just feels like a narrator. Like it's like, oh, and now the person is doing this, or like the sort of that insidious way in which like in the Stanley Parable, it's sort of like you're being talked about as you're doing things. But in the case of Firewatch, like I wanted to know who she was. Like there was actually there was a desire that was being elicited to know. So in this world where like you don't necessarily know why you're doing things, you are being. I've recently become really fascinated with like how do games elicit desire in players. And it's very tricky in games that do it really well. Like I feel like they have this like really important understanding that I want to unlock. So I think I'm going to go back and play Firewatch again to figure it out. So we're not going to get to your second one because actually I want to leave it on that note. Like that was a really great point to end on. And I also want to let everybody know that if you have loved listening to Russ, you can actually find more of his work at www.russell, and that's Russell, RUSSELL Perkins, PERKINS.com. Also, Russ, you have a podcast. So,
I do.
Big heart. so Russ hosts a podcast with his brother Steve. I have actually watched an episode of said podcast, and
you poor man.
No, I'm not going to allow you to self-deprecate. It's called Joygasm, and I love that title, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
A video game and movie podcast. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on Spotify or wherever fine podcasts are sold. Russ, I know I can't speak for Lauren, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you both. This has been a pleasure. Absolutely. I'm tickled pink. How about that?
All right. With that, thank you so much, Russ.
Thank you.